Thank you for agreeing to talk with me today. It's good to be able to share information because with the Bridges Out of Poverty model, we learn from one another. So my goal today is that people will learn from you, from both of you, to hear about this new initiative that's happening in Wichita. And in full disclosure, that's my hometown, so I'm very excited. But if you would just take a couple of seconds, Jolene, if you'll start, just introduce yourself, and then Diane, if you'll introduce yourself. I have some questions that I'd like you to answer.
Cool. I'm Jolene Bright, and I am the Director of Community Impact here at HopeNet here in Wichita, America. And I'm a therapist by trade, and I've been here about 7 years. And then there's a whole big old fat story around how in the world did we start talking about zip codes and poverty.
Thanks. Diane.
My name is Diane Aubrey. Wichita is my hometown, but I left for about 25 years and just moved back recently and got involved with HopeNet as a volunteer. And from there, got to meet Jolene and hear about their effort toward working with our zip codes, and from there to the Bridges ICT. But I had an encounter with Ruby Payne's framework of poverty probably 20 years ago.
As an educator.
Yes.
Yeah. So you've mentioned it, but let's talk a little more about Bridges ICT and what that is and the zip codes, and talk about how this idea started. Jolene, do you want to kind of start us off?
Yeah, I'll try not to get too animated and excited and all that kind of stuff, but everyone listening probably is aware of we were in a pandemic, and no one will say when that's over or not. But during that time in 2020, as HopeNet had gone home for 4 months and was coming back, we have always had a desire to serve the poor, those where services were out of reach, and how do we bring them within reach. And so we began looking at, because the pandemic allowed for us to broaden our services, especially for therapy services, we could go to the entire state and do that virtually. And then for coaching, the world was our domain, and so we could go there. So we began to say, what new opportunities are there, and that we make sure that we are not forgetting how do we want to serve the poor and remember to deliver just as good as services as we would to anyone who was resourced. And so we began looking at a map of Kansas, and we said, well, look, what's the poorest areas in Kansas? And then we eventually got to, what are the poorest zip codes, the top 25 poorest zip codes in Wichita? And it felt too big. And so in Wichita, there's 35 zip codes. And so we thought, okay, let's narrow it down. And we said, what about the top 10? And it seemed a little bit more manageable. And it's really kind of cool because when you look at the map, it's like right in the heart of the city and across that you see all these zip codes. And it felt like, what do we want to do? So let's make sure that we go and begin talking about getting ahead. You may say, why in the world are we getting ahead and just getting by world? Well, because HopeNet had already done it delivered that for the past 10 years. At that time, it was about 8 years. And so here we're sitting at 10 years of history of delivering, getting ahead, and even virtually. So we did not stop even once the pandemic came. We decided to move forward. And so then we began to say, when I met Diane, I was just saying, how can we begin talking to schools, churches, nonprofits, other social service agencies, and just be talking to them about getting ahead, because we know it's something that works. We know that life transformation happens. And in regards to poverty, our story is we don't have the full answer, but we do believe we have a piece of the answer. So that's how it was birthed, to say, let's begin going out and sharing with people, even if it takes all year to begin visiting all of these people. And then it evolved into, okay, it's a bigger thing than that. It's like, we're going to say, how can we offer support to anybody that wants to do getting ahead in the top 10 poorest zip codes. And so we said if we could put one getting ahead class in all of the 10 zip codes for the next 10 years, what kind of transformation would we be seeing and experiencing? So thus, Bridges ICT was being birthed. We just didn't know what it was called then, but that's kind of where we are, and that's the history of it.
Thanks. So Diane, you kind of got in on this at the ground floor in some respects as the conversations just continued to build.
So I was standing in the boardroom at HopeNet. I was here for a different event and looking at the map, the zip code map that they had put on the wall. And Jolynn just said, do you want to know what that is? And I was like, sure. And so she started telling me, well, we have this vision of reaching the 10 poorest zip codes. And at that point, it wasn't determined yet exactly what the effort would be. And so I started helping her, collecting data and looking at names and addresses and people and going on visits with her. And then this last spring, and I'm not sure how this happened, but a group of women from not only HopeNet, but other agencies in town who were doing Getting Ahead were able to go to Tulsa and visit, Muskogee, and visit Treasurer McKenzie and the work that they're doing there. And they came back and invited me to a debriefing meeting, even though I hadn't been on the trip. And it was clear that the vision had just crystallized and that the Bridges Out of Poverty was what needed to be done.
Got it. Yeah. And so since then, there's been lots of things going on, including a planning meeting and a vision statement and a budget and a 5-year plan is all coming together. Do either of you want to talk a little bit more about really some of the things that have happened since spring?
Well, can I start with this and then I call Diane Dr. D. So it's hard for me to call her Diane. I don't know. It just doesn't come out of my mouth. But she and Lynn, if you'll let us be funny a little bit,
of course.
That Dr. D didn't say anything about sucking noises or anything like. I think it was this map that sucked her in. It wasn't necessarily me behind the map sucking, but I think that we both were drawn to it and it just felt right. So that was really good. But we were trying to figure out who can help us with just planning, and we've not done this thing before. And so it's like, who can help us be strategic? Who can help us plan with us? And one particular organization, we were on a virtual call with them. I just remember I almost came to tears when this gentleman said this. He said, one of the best gifts that you all could give Wichita is to go away for 3 days and get a plan together, strategically plan, and come back. And I was just amazed. And Lynn, you got to participate in some of that. But Dr. D helped to lead us through that. And we walked away with a vision statement, with a mission statement, and just some framework around it where we can bounce from in our everyday life. So going away was good. So if you're listening to us, if someone tells you that, do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the moment. It seemed as if from early April until we went away, we had a lot of good ideas. We'd sit around and talk. Some ideas we'd toss out, and others we'd say, no, we're going to keep that. But we never really moved forward until we took the time to go on basically a little retreat where all we were there for was the planning, the thinking through. We had a really well-balanced group of people who were there. There were only 6 of us. But everyone brought their own perspective to the table and their area of expertise. And so it worked. I put together a little agenda. These are the things we need to talk about. We got there, and some of those things I mean, I thought it was going to take us all day to talk about the first thing, and it was done in 2 hours. And so that gave us more room to do more than we'd actually hoped to. And I do think that that was a turning point for us, because then people kept coming all summer and saying, we've heard about Bridges ICT. What are you doing? How do we get involved? What is it? And we're like, well, it's sort of this, but it's sort of something else. But after the retreat, we knew the vision, we knew the mission, we could describe it, we could all speak the same language, which is such a value in the Bridges model. And so since then, it's like getting on a fast moving train and you're like, can't get off now, gotta go.
Yeah, it's true. So really, I think too, it's important to say that from the retreat, really there's maybe 3 prongs. And we've talked a lot about getting ahead, but there is the Bridges Out of Poverty model and staying ahead as well. Mm-hmm. That's important in the work moving forward. And I do know that from a getting ahead facilitator, it came back to say there has to be more. Mm-hmm. We can't just offer the class. So that's where the staying ahead, I think, became so important. And then being able to build the Bridges Out of Poverty model so that we can continue in the community to educate those that are employing individuals, that are doing healthcare and all those other things as well. But are there other things you want to talk about, especially as far as the vision for the staying ahead piece?
Can I want to just say, because I want to shout out to Treasurer McKenzie in Muskogee and her whole team and her board. What they did for us, that when we went to go visit, we needed to see it. Mm-hmm. And mainly it was, how can we see it under one roof? And they have that. So that part about talking about how do they deliver Bridges Out of Poverty to the resource people, then seeing Getting Ahead being offered in Spanish and English, childcare going on, there's a meal happening, there's staying ahead piece, which our dear friend Michelle Martin said that's the part that's missing, is like we graduate all these Getting Ahead people, and Treasure told us this. She said you are basically dumping a lot of Getting Ahead graduates into your community, and you're not giving them the support that they need to move on. So what if they need help with parenting? What if they need help with their finances more, or nutrition, or boundaries, or whatever? And so seeing it under one roof, Lynn, it almost makes me want to cry right now when I think about it, because it left us speechless. And we had to think, now Muskogee is like 38,000 people. And so then you have to take that times 10 to come back to Wichita and say, this thing that we're talking about is humongous. And there's no way that we can do this on our own. But I just really feel like Treasure was just so confident and just giving, just pouring into us to tell us, so that we had to soak it all in. There was no talking that was necessary on our trip back, but just trying to take it all in to say, how in the world can we duplicate this in some way in Wichita? And I think that's the piece, and especially the 3 prongs, we could see what was missing. Mm-hmm. And where we could spring from. And Treasure's not going away. And because we are blessed to have you, Lynn, in the city, that's just God ordained. You know what I'm saying? That's all I want to say. That you can function as our consultant. And so you just feel like this thing is right. And so now where do we bounce from there? And I'll let Dr. D talk about that.
Yeah. So one of the things that I have been impressed with, because I come from higher ed and not from any kind of social services background or therapy background or anything. And what I've observed is that Wichita has such a strong network of people who want to help people, of agencies and services and community organizers and everything. But what they're missing, if they're missing anything, because we are trying to move the needle on poverty in Wichita, is this coordination amongst themselves. And so Bridges ICT in the Staying Ahead offers multiple things. One is they deliver a ready-made audience. Here are these Getting Ahead graduates that we're graduating across the city, and they need what you are offering already. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Mhm.
We have
Right.
to just build the relationships with those who have something to offer, and then connect them to the people who have the need. And so I think that Wichita is poised at a moment, and we also have a fairly high number of resourced people who want to help, but they want to know that what they're helping with is going to make that move. And since Bridges has such a long track record in other places, we're able to deliver that hope for them as well.
Got it. You know, we keep talking about Bridges ICT, which is what this initiative has been named. You want to explain a little bit what ICT is? It actually has two meanings for me, I think. Yeah. Go ahead, Joanne.
Well, we usually start out the conversation with the people saying, when you see Bridges and then the big capital ICT, well, anyone from Wichita will say, well, it's Wichita. It's, ICT, it's the airport, it's all that. Okay, but and we'll give Michelle credit here too. She was sat down one day by herself and she said, but it's in community together. So it has a double meaning. And so we're really excited about that, of bringing people together. And it works two ways. It doesn't just say one person needs to come across this side of the bridge and another one needs to come. It's where we need each other.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Perfect. All right. So there's some big things happening with the initiative starting in November. Who wants to talk about those days?
Dr. D.
Talk about that. So we are bringing in both Michael Sicaccio and Treasurer McKenzie, and having a half-day workshop for those who need just the flyover definition of what Bridges ICT is, for the the community leaders and the people who probably can't devote a whole day to the Bridges workshop. And then we're inviting, we have room for about 50 to 80 people in that one. And then we're having a larger one on Friday, November 3rd, with Treasure for the boots on the ground people who have already been working in that space. And then we're inviting them to come and understand the Bridges model and see whether they want to plug in with us or not, whether they want to start at getting ahead or help with their staying ahead. We're inviting ministers from local churches. We're inviting even people who may not be associated with the group, but who we know have community influence, and then all of the agencies and people that we can get involved in it. And we're so excited to be able to offer the national speakers to get us launched and set our vision for where we're going. And then Bridges ICT will follow up after that. That's going to be our work for the next few years.
Yeah, good. Now I know there's getting ahead classes happening in the city, and there's going to be, I think, a joint graduation in December. Is that true?
Yes.
I think we're that's still up for debate, or not even debate, but just to think about, because we think about the Getting Ahead graduates and they have their own stories, their own cohort. And so we're trying to see what would be most beneficial for the people that are involved. And so that, but no matter what, either there's going to be one big graduation or there are going to be 3 graduations in December, because we are having Getting Ahead classes in 3 of the zip codes. So 67202, 67203, and 67214, which is right now, when we're talking about it, 67214 is the poorest zip code in Kansas as of 12/31/2022.
Yeah.
And Jolene, you might want to mention the way in which the Getting Ahead graduation last year was such a catalyst for moving this initiative forward.
Oh, yes. And of course, none other but the Lynn Jackson from AHA Process was in the house. And that was a thing sitting at my desk. And I just heard, don't forget to invite Lynn Jackson. And so I'm glad she was there to witness it, because I believe that it was a catalyst moment. So we decided to have our graduation at Chicken and Pickle, which is a pickleball court, but also serves food and all of that. And they wanted to do it. Chicken and Pickle, they love nonprofits. They offer their support. whatever events that we're trying to have. They're there trying to, not just for HopeNet, but for any nonprofit in the city. And so we said, yes, we'll come. And we were intentional about who we invited, as whether that was law enforcement, city officials, like the mayor gave a not a speech, but gave a message to the graduates, which they didn't know was coming. And there was just some other key other nonprofit leaders who were there as well. And then also the people who that Dr. D, that you talk about, that say that we have these resource people that want to help, that they're passionate about this. So we made sure they were in the audience. And from there, I think it was just a good point to begin people seeing this is a big deal, and this can move the needle after hearing stories of the graduates. It wasn't us. It wasn't the program we put on for that night. It was the graduates' stories. And Lynn, what we would say is that there wasn't a dry eye in the place because of how people just talked about from week 1 to week 16, how their lives have been changed. And there's kids in this room, like there's a 10-year-old over there in childcare that only God knows what's going to happen to them because their mommy or their daddy made a choice for 16 weeks in this time in history to change the trajectory of their entire family. And a city councilman actually then said, well, can you come and meet at my breakfast and whatever? And when we did go share at the breakfast, of course, we always have an ulterior motive too. That we have an invitation. We have to say, what would it be like if we did something here? If it was here in your space, in the community? And he believed us and took us up on it. Yeah. And so thank you, Councilman Johnson, for doing that.
Great.
And can I add something about the child care component? Last fall, in that same class of Getting Ahead, the child care workers began to take their own initiative and have started working on developing a curriculum that goes along with what their parents are learning for the kids who are old enough. And so if we're talking about finance today, then they'll talk about finance at the kids level. Or if we're talking about relationships, or if we're talking about language barriers, they work with the kids and they're just playing with what they understand the parents are learning, but they use that as part of the child care initiative in that evening. And so this year they're trying to build on that and make it applicable to other sites if they would want to. And so we'll just see what happens with that. We don't know, it's too early. We don't know what kind of effect it would have, but I love that even the childcare workers are in on it and that they want to help move the needle, not just by watching some people's kids, but by also helping the kids to learn a little bit along the way. So we're really proud of them as well. I think that's impressive to me.
So it didn't happen overnight, and moving forward, it's going to take a lot of work. But what I'm hoping is that I can invite you back in about 6 months and we can give an update so people can kind of see the next level. What's happening? The vision's been cast, the invitations are out. Now coming back to say, okay, here's what's going on, and maybe also talking about where the next Getting Ahead classes will be.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Lynn. It's been really, it's an exciting adventure.
It is.
Thrilled to death. I got caught staring at that map.
Well, thank you both for your time today. And
thank you, Lynn.
Good.